Hello and welcome to Revolution Health. This is Dr. Jason Dean. We are live today on Facebook, and I am here with a very gifted doctor, Dr. Nasha Winters. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Doc. I'm really pleased to be here. And just a quick thing I know it didn't happen on the other radio show, but it's Nasha, like echinacea.
Nasha,
so
you got it
all the time. I'm used to it.
You have an awesome name. I love it.
Happy parents, man. It's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. And before we dive into this, because we're actually taking on the big C word today, which is intimidating for a lot of people. And I want to kind of give a little credit where it's due. Is a lot of people probably know Charlotte Gerson. So I learned 5-10 years ago that cancer was quote unquote already cured. And there was a lot of money in the medical industry on basically treating our bodies as a commodity. And Charlotte Gerson, I think she was in her early 90s, but her dad, Dr. Max Gerson, was one of the first ones that really publicly, quote unquote, cured cancer and major debilitating diseases, and did it with his own daughter. And she's passed on, but she was such a loudspeaker for this exact thing we're going to talk about today. So I just wanted to start the show off with that. And I know you have a little background with her.
I do. I was lucky enough to take a Gerson certification program back in the mid 90s when they had a clinic for a period of time in the Sedona, Arizona area. Plus, I spent a lot of time down in New Mexico clinics where Gerson therapies were very much alive and well, and really did a lot of literature scouring of Dr. Max Gerson's original works, which did deviate over time, in our kind of modernized days. But you're right, these are people who brought this conversation into the light and impacted hundreds of thousands of people over 75, 80 years. Yeah, it's a shame to lose such an icon at 96 long years old. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Now, I want to dive into this with you because we're going to have people that are watching this from all over the world. And we have a lot of practitioners. We have a lot of people who are just trying to get healthier. And some people know that there's this thing to the whole cancer problem, and the cancer, what it really is, and the fact that it can be handled. And then there's a lot of people who still are kind of bought and paid for into this medical paradigm of this cancer is this big bad thing that we just get overnight, et cetera. Give everyone a little background on you and how you even got involved in this, because it is such a big topic.
Well, I tell you, as you probably have gotten into, most of our colleagues, when we get passionate about something, it's because we had a personal experience with it, right? So if we've had an illness or a loved one who suffered, we tend to kind of navigate towards that. And that was really my experience. I was diagnosed at a very, very young age with a terminal cancer without any hope offered to me. And sometimes when you're given no choices, actually many more choices open up before you. So that has been kind of my MO in learning. I'm 27 plus years out into this journey. I'm still learning things for my own health and that of the tens of thousands of patients that I've had the absolute privilege to work with. They teach me every day. And now the research and the types of things I've been thinking and applying to myself and thousands of patients, we're actually starting to get the data. We're actually starting to do some of the research around it. So for all the years that I was, treated sort of as a quack, which I don't really mind because it was keeping me alive. So, quack. It's pretty cool to see a turning, of the tide that is allowing us to take a deeper dive into how to really care for ourselves in treatment of cancer as well as prevention.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And as we go into that, so what I'd love for you to do, because it's a very deep subject, and it's one of those things we could spend hours upon hours, days upon days, weekend seminars going over it, and you constantly dive deeper. But give everyone kind of a summary of what cancer is, because most people don't know that we have cancer cells going through our bodies right now. Like you and I have cancer cells in our body. So if you could give kind of an overview of what really cancer is, and then that helps us dive into this metabolic approach to it.
Sure. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, that all of us do have, in fact, cancer cells in our body at every given time. But the magic trick of that is that when our bodies are really tuned up, when we are in alignment with the seasons and the circadian rhythms in and outside of our bodies, when we're resting, when we're nourishing ourselves well, when we're doing what we love, when we have purpose, joy, and gratitude in our lives, when we are not exposed to daily toxicants and keep our bodies in motion and keep them tuned up, we are a lot less of a welcome doormat for invaders of imbalance in our system. It's issues inside of us. This is not something we go to bed with one day and wake up the next morning and we've, oh, got a chronic illness, oh, got cancer. It's something that has taken, by the time a cancer clump is big enough and loud enough to capture our attention, studies show it's been on board somewhere between 7 and 10 years. So that also shows in some of our studies that we're able to go in and out of cancering, I mean that is a verb, purposefully, an average of 7 times in our lifetime. And we don't even know what's happening. The almighty wisdom within is taking care of these things, right? So when it does get big enough and loud enough to take our attention, that is such a clue that we've been out of balance for a very long time. And what I like to help patients do is dive in deep to understand what individual imbalances cause their process, because there is no one cause, there is no one cure. And even if you're 10 women with breast cancer in the same room at the same exact diagnosis and the same exact tissue type and even stage, you all have a very different reason for why that cancer was big enough and loud enough to manifest and capture your attention. So that's where we've come to today. Instead of looking at this as a genetic disease that we're all sitting ducks and we're just simply it's a matter of just bad luck that this lands in your lap, which is still, unfortunately, some of the ideas that are out there in medicine today. This is basically the way we've been approaching cancer for at least 70 years, definitely for a good 45, 50 years since the war on cancer in 1971 was claimed. But what we've learned and what we've resurrected was the concept that this is actually growing within a metabolic imbalance, something down to our energy production pathways from our mitochondria, which are these little organelles that live in all of our cells except for our red blood cells, that are what make us move these bodies down the road every day. Okay, and basically when that energy becomes less effective, less efficient, when we're putting the wrong fuel sources in to feed and nourish those mitochondrial energy factories, or if we're assaulting them with things from our environment, such as toxicants, such as medications, such as ongoing stressful situations, then they become much less able to do their job appropriately. In fact, aging is just mitochondrial aging. That's all it is. And so we can actually, when we look at the fountain of youth and also the fountain of health, it comes down to these little factories, and we are able to reestablish balance, harmony, peace within those, and resurrect them and make them more effective and efficient every time we take a bite of food, every time we take a thought, every time we take a deep breath of air or a big gulp of water. What is in those resources that nourish us on many levels can create illness or wellness.
It's so interesting how mitochondria has become a household word at this point. I mean, 5-10 years ago, I mean, maybe. No one even thought of this word. There was maybe only a couple doctors who were even looking into it potentially. And now, no matter what we talk about, whether it's cancer or anything else, mitochondria has to come into this. And it's amazing how so many people are literally saying it. And you're going right to it saying, hey, if these mitochondria, these little energy sources, are not doing what they're supposed to do, this creates a catastrophic problem.
You got it. You got it. And, you know, a lot of your listeners, myself included, you included, probably the first time we heard of the mighty mitochondria was probably in like 5th or 6th grade biology class. And then we probably closed that textbook and moved on, you know? So it's like now you said it's become this household name. I literally just came back from a huge metabolic health symposium last weekend in Long Beach, California, with the best of the best in researchers and clinicians and, you know, health enthusiasts. And the topics were, you know, from neurological disorders, from like Alzheimer's and autism, to diabetes and obesity, to cardiovascular disease, to longevity and aging, to fitness, but also to cancer. And we're all 850 of us sitting in the same room. And we could be talking about any one of those topics, and they're the same disease. They're the same source of disease. They just might manifest in different ways. Some of us might have vulnerable brains. Some of us might have vulnerable cardiovascular systems. Some of us might be vulnerable to sort of tumor turn on, if you will. So it's very interesting to me that I feel like collectively we have a lot more resources to help us understand the pathophysiology of all the chronic ailments that really plague us today. And that also means that we have a lot more bright, active minds on finding the solutions and helping us understand where to go from here.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So I'm from a chiropractic standpoint, and we're taught like day one, that the disease is trauma, toxins, thoughts. And it's interesting because as we look into this, one of the biggest components that I see, and I don't necessarily dive into the psychology of it or maybe even the trauma of it, but from a toxin standpoint, and there's actually a fourth one now that we've been adding, which is EMFs, because that kind of silent one before. But how do you, I mean, you dive into this as well into the book too, and from the toxin standpoint, because, and I'm going to dive into the genetics here in 1 second, but let's tackle kind of the toxin thing, because I almost feel like, especially the American public has totally been blinded by the fact that, oh, our environment's toxic, but it doesn't really affect us. How much is toxins really affect, a key in the cancer story?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's very interesting. I love that you brought this up, because first of all, as a naturopathic doctor, as a chiropractic doctor, as an acupuncturist, as a Ayurvedic practitioner, a homeopath, we come from a vitalistic, holistic perspective. We understand that basically energy and information we put in is also energy and information we put out. So if you put crap in, you're going to get crap out. You know, if you put good things in, you're going to get good out. So a bit oversimplified there, but that concept that we understand that we are cumulative effect of what we expose ourselves to on a daily basis. So my mentor in the environmental health world is Dr. Walter Crinnion. He and Dr. Joe Pizzorno just put out an amazing, incredibly thorough, heady textbook this year on environmental medicine specifically, because it is time to talk about this in a much more direct form and fashion. And what Dr. Crinnion says is that it's no longer a matter of if you have toxicity. It's a matter of how much and how your personal epigenetic blueprint responds to that, and what other kind of assaults on your mitochondria might be at play. So where I've been intrigued is, for instance, I just came from a giant symposium of mitochondrial health and how it addresses everything. That's the first time they've all been put under the same roof at the same time, having the same conversation. And yet when I go to my environmental health conferences, that's segmented out. That's just talking about the environmental pollutants. And when I go to cancer conferences, those are also separated out. I would love to see them under the same roof, because ultimately today, one of the biggest assaults to our ability to stay well, to achieve optimal health, is a direct result of what we're doing to the planet around us. And people like Michael Pollan, who wrote the book Omnivore's Dilemma, says you can't live healthy on an unhealthy planet. And that's becoming exceedingly more and more true. It's harder to find really pristine places in the world. And so we're all really taking that on, and we all have a duty to work within our own bodies to heal that, but also to help kind of educate and empower our own communities to take steps to help clean up the environment in, on, and around us on a regular basis. So I think we are on to something new. I think you really hit it on the head. We have to get ourselves into a discussion together, because people like the IARC, known as IARC, which is a third-party sort of researcher and repository for the impact of different toxicants in our world on the cancer outcome, on cancer statistics. That happens, but again, they're talking on deaf ears. So we need to bring everybody to the table, and I believe that's where we're going to be heading in the next couple of years. And you nailed it when you said the biggest one that's coming, the biggest tsunami that's coming to our health is the EMF piece. And that's the other part that's not talked about at cancer conferences very much, or at environmental health conferences very much. And I actually tried to get them both, all three at the table this year for this conference. So maybe you are going to be the person to help get this going. Maybe I can, maybe your listeners can, maybe we will help get that conversation started.
And I want to dive into that too. I mean, one of the first questions I was going to ask before we dove into that was, are there specific toxins now, whether it be a heavy metal or a chemical or immune challenges, anything like that? Is there a specific things that you see maybe more often when you're dealing with cancer? I'm curious about that, and that's kind of a trick question because you're not ready for that. But I'm actually curious on that because I deal in the nutritional world as well. It's one of my passions in my field, and it's amazing on a daily basis how many people I see coming in with heavy metal toxicity, poisoning, heavy chemicals in random parts of the body. Is there anything you've seen specifically that pops up more often than not in the toxin world?
Yeah, because I do a lot of testing. That's one of the things. I'm a data girl, so I don't guess. I test, assess, address, adjust accordingly, never guess. Because we do have so much, we all deal with it differently. So I do test a lot in the just basic labs. So I can look at probably the biggest toxin, excuse me, to our population is the extreme amount of sugar we've been dumping in ourselves. That's our legal drug toxin of choice that has gone from about 30% of our diet in 1850 to about 80% of our diet today. And the quality of that sugar has also changed. So when you talked about sources of other toxins, we know that high fructose corn syrup also has quite a high level of mercury. It's just part of the processing of that. In any processed food you eat, if you eat out, you are eating high fructose corn syrup. So we see mercury pretty off the charts in most patients today. The other test I test pretty much religiously across the board now that is frighteningly endemic is glyphosate. Okay, so we can just test somebody's urine, a $60 urine test through a company called detoxproject.org, O-R-G. They'll send you a kit, you pee in it, you send it off, and they'll tell you your levels. It should be below 2. What freaks people out is the highest rate of glyphosate I see are in my folks who still eat a very grain and legume dense diet, because both of those sequester glyphosate in a way that our leafy greens and other vegetables and our animal proteins do not. So that's a frightening endeavor when we're pushing a high intake of these foods for health. And yet maybe that was a good idea, 5,000 years ago in the Ayurvedic population, but now they're all dying of the same diseases that plague the West. Massive amounts of diabetes and cancer at rates that are starting to surpass our own in the United States, because basically people like Monsanto have taken over that entire country, and the rainwater is even filled with these poisons. And so if you're eating a diet high in pulses and legumes, rice and beans and whatnot, which is still the vast majority of the people on the planet, that also means that they are swimming in a pile of glyphosate just by the nature of how those foods are trying to take those heavy toxins out of the soil and sequester them into their shaft. It's a protective mechanism, but then we ingest it and not so protective in us.
Yeah, you're talking our language now, and it's so true. Sugar, I mean, it is mind blowing. That and the grains of what people are consuming is just off the charts. And now let's go to that variable, which is the EMFs, because it's not like we haven't known this was coming. We have known it was coming, but the problem is like us being on video right now. Like, it requires internet connections. It requires Wi-Fi sometimes, depending what it is. But now we have 5G coming around the corner, and I think it's actually fascinating because I'm starting to hear. I don't listen to the radio very often, but my wife was listening the other day, and they were talking about it on the radio, as in, obviously from a positive standpoint. Oh, 5G is coming to your phone. It's going to be so much faster, etc. And I've even spoken to other professionals in just this arena. But what are your thoughts on what this is going to do? Because quite honestly, already dealing with patients, we're trying to figure out ways around this from a standpoint of, I'm not going to make 5G go away necessarily, at least not right now. So now we just got to find a way for the body to handle it. And that can be anything from, we're seeing devices to stem cell therapy preventatively. What are your thoughts in that world?
Well, I think you nailed it in that we can't get away from it. We're not going to. And it's what allows me to speak to you in this format right now. And, when you look, I probably look like the lady covered in tinfoil on a regular basis. So I have all kinds of grounding devices, standing on grounding mats. I've got EMF, like light blockers, blue light blockers on my computer. I'm wearing blue blocker on my glasses right now. Like, everything I do to mitigate the best I can. Just as when we can create a technology that causes harm, we are also a race that can create, a human population that can create a technology that can mitigate that harm. So I also get hopeful by the cool products that are coming out. So for instance, if you are a patient of mine who's pregnant or has a baby on the way, I'm the person who's giving you the gift of these crazy little, basically hats and little blankets that block EMFs. So little baby blankets for moms to put over their belly when they fly that have like basically a little built-in Faraday cage into the beautiful, organic fibers of this blanket that's protecting and shielding these little evolving beings, and same thing with little baseball caps and hats. You can also get those. We're moving into an entire new generation of creating products around mitigating this because it's not going to go away. We also don't know the long-term implications, but I can tell you from the patients I've worked with and my sister-in-law who's very involved in the autism community, they are the canary in the coal mine. We are already seeing the toxic burden of these EMFs even without the 5G experience yet, that some of us just have certain nervous systems that are wired to be far more sensitive to this. And some of the compelling data that's coming out is we are being bombarded now with a lot of co-infections, Lyme's, all the different forms of Lyme's, Epstein-Barr virus, which already today has over 200,000 cancer diagnoses a year associated just with that virus. We're seeing an explosion in these viruses that we are starting to find out from the powers that be in the world of physics research and electromagnetic research, that the fields are starting to make us more susceptible to these co-infectious processes. That is a frightening idea. And so we're starting to see explosions in this. And just for your readers and listeners to get a perspective, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 2.4 women in the United States alone are expected to have cancer in their lifetime. Half of the population is expected to have diabetes. We've not even begun to look at the levels of autoimmunity, autism, neurodegeneration, and co-infectious processes that are actually wreaking havoc in far greater numbers than what I just gave you of the stats we've already collected. And there's a lot of people out there who think that this push to modernization and connection may actually be our downfall, and that it's way more dangerous than cigarettes ever were known to be.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's one of those things where no matter, we talk about it because we're passionate about it and we want to change it, and we get people who are like, well, that sounds so negative, but in reality, I believe we have to know the cause of something before we can ever fix the actual cause, and that's really the message on this, is like we have to wake people up. That's the beauty of having this be able to be video. To take this and then push it out there on YouTube, and people are starting to wake up to realize this is occurring, and I am very hopeful in that. Now, diving into the genetic aspect, and I want to get your background, basically your summary on this, your opinion on this. I'm personally still a 97-98% of disease is lifestyle related, or maybe it was passed on from somebody, but it was still lifestyle generated. It's not that you just genetically became predisposed to it. Somebody within that line had passed on something, but there was the genetics don't change unless something in the lifestyle changed. How do you encapsulate this in this cancer approach? Because there's so many people out there that still believe, well, it's in the family, so I'm just going to get it automatically.
Right. Well, first of all, you know that the actual statistics on the genetic cause is about 5% of all cancer types. And those are genes, and we talk about things like BRCA or ATM or Lynch mutations. By the way, those are also still epigenetics. Those are also still methylation issues, DNA repair issues that we actually still do have the power to manipulate and to change the outcome. So even that 5%, we still are a bit empowered to do something about it. But as you noted, the vast majority, 95%, is completely up to us. Really about what we put on, in, and around our bodies, who we surround ourselves by, where we put our energies, where we spend our money. Where we pay, do we know our farmer? Do we know our rancher? Do we know precisely where our water is coming from? Do we know the air we're breathing around us? Do we know the types of things we're putting on our body, which is millions of mouths? Every time you rub something into your skin, it is the largest organ of absorption and elimination. How is that working? Are you sweating? If you're not, you're holding all those toxins right in. Are you pooping? If you're not, you're holding all those toxins in. So these basic concepts we consider in that the epigenetically above the gene, we can bounce those little switches on and off basically at will of what we choose to put on, in, and around us. And that's not just food, that's thoughts, that's everything that you alluded to earlier. And so once people start to wake up and realize, maybe I shouldn't pop an aspirin every time I have an ache or pain, because that will keep dismantling my gut microbiome. Maybe I shouldn't pop a Tylenol every time I get a little fever, give this to my child because we know it increases risks of autism in a pretty significant way and depletes all of your glutathione levels, which is what fights our a lot of our infections and a lot of our toxicant exposures. We start to become more mindful about, maybe we don't use Dawn soap. Maybe we go back to the vinegar and baking soda that our grandparents and our great-grandparents used. These are the types of things that maybe we don't Febreze the sofa, and maybe we're even careful of what sofa we purchase. We don't want the one that's stain resistant. Those are the ones that are extremely toxic. I mean, these are the weird things we have to think about today when we use that kind of meme of modern problems, first world problems. We're living them. Those first world problems are really dangerous. It's more dangerous to kind of live on a brand new couch day than running from the saber-toothed tiger of our ancestors in some ways, because these processes are a little more insidious and they're harder to put your finger on versus like being eaten by a land shark or whatever. So, that's the place here. We live in a very different world, and we need to start to become active participants in the world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're stuck in this middle ground where we want to save our planet. We want to keep it good, but at the same time, we have all this industrialization. Some of it we know is not good, but then some of it is allowing us to do the things we're doing right now, is allowing us to actually talk and get the message out to people. And so we're kind of in that world where we need the best of each world, but to also create that utopia. And I am convinced to this point that there is a way to change our cell phone signals into healing frequencies. I'm convinced at some point this is going to happen.
Chills. And you know what? I actually was at a conference not too long ago where there are people doing research exactly in this. It's like, so how can you sort of run it through a device that reframes the frequency? I mean, we can do that with other technologies already. And something interesting you talked about, like when you tune up your mitochondrial resilience and the ability for them to be more numerous and more active and more higher vibration. I mean, I guess it sounds esoteric, but we're just energy. So it just is what it is. But they are even protective when they're functioning more optimally. So even just making sure your mitochondria are tuned up at their best is going to help you sort of have your Wonder Woman bracelets on against all of the EMFs that are coming at you at all times. So when you're run down, when you're tired, you're always more vulnerable, right? But when you're tuned up at your best and your energy is flowing and you're eating well and you're sleeping well and you're laughing a lot and you've got a lot of love and connection in your life, you are resilient as can be. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Give everybody a little background and a little, synopsis on this book that you came out with, because I don't say this about all books. I get a lot of books that people say are great, and there's some great books out there, but this is one of those ones that can and will change the world. Give us some synopsis on that.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you. That means a lot. When this book came out, it was literally a begging, it was like a screaming, a demand, I should say, from all the clients we'd been doing retreats with for many years, saying, when you do these retreats, it's like giving us a sip of water through a fire hydrant. Would you please write this down in one place? So my co-author, Jess, and I did just that. We took all of my life experience, a lot of her great experience in the nutrition world, her really beautiful ability to take my thoughts and download them, and her help put it all together in a beautiful flow, and our voices equally coming through to help people start to understand how to look below the hood. Because almost every patient I see says to me that I was healthy until I had cancer. And I'm here to tell you that is absolutely not true. And like in your world, when you're in a vitalistic practice, you put your hands on someone, you just sit across from someone, you just sit near them, you take their pulses, you take their blood pressure, and you know right away they are not healthy. They're not in tune to the world around them. They're out of balance in some way. So the book allows a starting point. At the first part, we have a 10-part questionnaire of the 10 main, I guess, patterns that fuel into a broken or a healthy mitochondrial bucket, if you will. And so we let people assess for themselves, take these 10 questionnaires and get a sense of what their personal priority is. And we ask questions that are not as obvious to people. There's a couple obvious ones, but really we want people to start to think outside the box. And we want them to start to understand for themselves, wow, I didn't realize I was so far out of range here on maybe my sugars, or on my stress response, or on my circadian rhythm, or on my sex hormones. And maybe they then dive deep into some of the tests we talk about might be helpful for them, maybe some of the diet or lifestyle strategies that can help them overcome and optimize that pattern for themselves, and start to make themselves more accountable to their own body signals, and also start to have a means of following through and making sure they're weeding that garden on a regular basis and amending that soil on a regular basis so they can have the best outcomes, whether they're trying to prevent cancer, whether they're trying to treat it in the process and support other therapies, or whether they're trying to deal with another chronic illness that comes right back down to how the mitochondria are functioning. Our goal, our vision, was to basically give people a textbook, a manual on how to understand their own bodies and adjust things accordingly based on that person's biochemical individuality.
Beautiful. I love that. Before we head out, do me a favor and give everyone something where they can just kind of start from square one. What is one thing they can change today if either they're trying to prevent or they're actually dealing with it right now, and they have the healing mind approach and they want to beat this? What do they do?
Well, I think that one thing would be that that 10-part questionnaire is just great. Like, just do kind of an audit, a self-audit on yourself. But if you don't want to take yourself to that level, if that's even too overwhelming right now, I just want you to think about where your food comes from, okay? And I want you to think about the fact that it's not a problem to be hungry sometimes. So maybe shoot for seeing if you can just make it from dinner till breakfast without having a late night snack or getting up in the middle of the night. See if you can push yourself to 12, 13 hours a day without eating. You start to make yourself a little more of a fine-tuned mitochondrial machine just by giving your body that rest to digest and process what's in there first, to help clean out and make room for new information. Those are simple strategies that even MD Anderson studies show that lowers risk of even recurrence of cancer by upwards of 70% simply by fasting 13 hours a day. That's not even taking into account what people are even eating. So these are simple, free strategies where you could just start to become aware of when and why and how and what you eat.
Absolutely beautiful. I love that. Where can people, whether they're looking to work with you, ask you questions, or get more information, where can people find you? Where can people contact you and get all this stuff?
Thank you for that. So check me out on drnasha.com, drnasha.com. Brand new site this year. We've got a whole section under there under patients. We've got a bunch of resources. We even a lot of very specific. If you're someone who's just like, I just want to understand my epigenetics, we have a person that does beautiful consulting on that. If you're someone who really wants to work on the emotional stress patterns, we've got a person for that. If you just want to really take a deep dive into maybe therapeutic ketosis, we have a keto coach for that. So we wanted to give you people where you feel like you need an expert in that arena that I've worked with and a tried true person. Also on our resources, we have dozens, if not hundreds, of great podcasts, free downloadable material, a great little 5 steps if you're diagnosed with cancer, what to do, where to start. That's free for you. We always have a newsletter. If you sign up, we send out lots of great newsletters of what's coming down the pipelines in health and wellness, especially cancer-centric. So please take advantage of those free resources. And what I currently do today is I am working with training doctors. So I will do consults on your behalf as the patient with your doctor. So we're feeding 2 birds with 1 seed, so that you, the patient, can get the support and resources you need to take an integrative approach to a chronic illness or cancer process while educating your doctor on how to do that effectively and efficiently, and feel confident that they know how to guide you through all the massive amount of information and misinformation that's out there in the world of integrative oncology today. So we're doing that. We're also doing some deep dives for a few doctors who are applying in and getting into like an intensive mentorship in integrative metabolic therapies for cancer. So we're doing that this year as well. We need more people in the trenches with the patients. That's where I've switched my gears from direct patient support to doctor support this year in order to get more people like yourself, Dr. Dean, to be out there to help folks know how to navigate this sometimes murky water.
Absolutely beautiful. You have a strategy and you're executing on it. That is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Very cool. So what we'll do is we'll actually post a link below to your website. Your website is phenomenal. Absolutely beautiful. It actually invites people to go there and research her and what she's doing. And not only is she obviously help patients, but getting doctors on board, because that's really how it's going to work. So Dr. Nasha Winters, thank you so much for being on the show today. I truly appreciate it. And thank you for all the effort you put into a very difficult topic, difficult situation that basically everyone's been affected by now. So thank you for being on Revolution Health and helping humanity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And keep doing what you're doing, my friend. This is what needs to happen, is sharing the word.
I appreciate it. Go check out Dr. Nasha Winters, her book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, and she's on tons of podcasts, tons of different webinars, things like that. Go check her out. She's an amazing woman. Thank you, everyone, today for joining me on Revolution Health with Dr. Nasha Winters. Share this across the globe. Get it out there. This is how we actually change healthcare in America. Have an amazing Monday afternoon to everybody.